Okay, well, once again, okay, now am I not, let me try to start recording again here. Anyway, we are recording live. This is Patrick also at Cadabra Software, and I want to thank you all for joining me in today's quick webinar on workflows. Have quite a few things to talk about today. Got quite a few demos. I'm going to try to get through it all, but there is so much to talk about. So anyway, quickly, you've seen this slide before. We're trying to do these every Thursday, very quick, 20-minute demo and presentation to distill something essential that you need for your job. There's no smoke and mirrors, and if you give us your info, we give you the samples. So listen, can you give us a quick shout out here?
Thanks, Patrick. I am Alyssa with Cadabra Software. I'm glad to have you all join us this morning. I just wanted to start this off and just tell you a little bit more about what Cadabra has to offer besides these weekly webinars. And first of all, we have a great community. Check it out. It's InfoPathDev.com. You can post questions. There's product downloads, free support. So it's just a great resource that you guys should check out. We also have a quicker support option. It's pay-as-you-go support. You can purchase a support pack on our website, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Cadabra also does consulting work for hire. If you have a project you think we can help out on, give us a call, send us an email, and we can check it out. We have tools and templates. On our website, we have free trials available, and we also have a powerful web service, DBXL, and there's a free trial on our website for DBXL as well. So certainly check out, see how they can help you with your projects. And we also have training courses. We have an online InfoPath Master course. We also have a 101 course coming up online as well. Both of these online courses are going to be in August, and all the details are on our website. We also have an in-person course, and that's going to be right outside the Seattle, Washington area, and it will be coming up in September. So if you have any questions about that, check out our website, send me an email, send Patrick an email, and we can give you more information. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, so today we're actually we have some new content, and some of you I see from our class 2 weeks ago will be familiar with this. But we redid some of our workflow content for our master class, and I'm going to be sharing the gist of it with you today. Workflow is really important. Now, obviously, InfoPath is there to help you automate data collection for those business processes that you have. It's a great form. It is the premier form technology in SharePoint today for doing that. And business processes, of course, you're going to be using them to route your data from one place to another. And then people need to obviously review and approve those forms, and they need to use different requests. For example, we're going to see an expense report today, require authorization. And the workflow helps you automate that routing, notifications to the users to approve it, and so on. So that's what workflow really is, right? Everyone gets it. Out of the box with InfoPath and SharePoint today, you've got a bunch of options, two main options, which is some of you may be saying, well, wait a minute, SharePoint workflows, that's all I got, right? Well, actually, that's not true. With InfoPath, you have this wonderful tool for creating rich forms, and those rich forms are smart forms, and that means that you can have rules in those forms and logic to hide and show things to surface your workflows. And the other thing you can do with InfoPath is you can create reusable template parts. We call these things XTPs, and they help you then to consistently create the same ad hoc workflow in multiple forms. Now with SharePoint is great for a bunch of things. Obviously, SharePoint Workflow is the solution for all the documents and all the different content types in SharePoint. So it's not just InfoPath, it's Word, it's Excel, you name it. And SharePoint uses those columns, and from InfoPath, their promoted properties, it uses those columns to condition steps in the workflow, and those steps then would do something. So they would move the form, they would set some status, they would create a list item, they might send email, they might change the permissions. So those are the out-of-box options that we're going to go through today. But now you may be thinking, well, you know, if InfoPath can do it, why not just InfoPath? Why not just SharePoint? What's the difference? Well, there's some benefits here to using a hybrid approach. First of all, SharePoint's great at routing things, and it's a generic solution for all your SharePoint documents, so people are very familiar with it. There's things you can do in SharePoint workflow like email, like migration of forms from one library to another that are much easier to do in SharePoint workflow than InfoPath logic. But InfoPath logic's great because you can do something, right there in the form. So when they open the form, they see the data next to the decision. In other words, the button for approve and reject is situated very close to the actual data that they need to make the decision. And that makes the UI much more flexible, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So real quick, and I'm going to show a demo of this in a second, what is an InfoPath workflow? Some of you may not have realized that InfoPath could be used in this way. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add, you'll see it later in my demo, that we'll add a section to our form. And this section will be at the top of the form, and it will show us basically the tasks that are associated with that form. And there will also be buttons and things like that. So it's basically a section that you add to your form. This isn't a great example of it because it's just showing the approve state, so you don't get the approve and the reject buttons. But once we have this section in our form, and we'll do this in a second, you can add rules to it. And those rules then can help you to hide the section if it's not in the submitted state. It can obviously hide it if there's no task, and then there's a bunch of rules here that you can see to set assignment and so forth. And we'll be going through those more in a second. When you're approving a form or rejecting it, you want to set the status, in this case current status, equal to one of those values. And that's useful because then that information can actually be used by SharePoint workflow to send email. So let's see, what's a workflow section? So workflow sections are essentially XML template parts. Now let's take a look at what an XML template part is. In InfoPath Designer today, you have the ability, of course, to create all the forms that you know and love. SharePoint list forms, you got your blank browser forms. You also down below here have the ability to create a template part. And we are packaging our workflow, our simple workflow template part as part of the samples today. Now, the workflow template part that I'm going to show you doesn't seem to appear here. Well, why is that? Well, if we look down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that open by default it defaults to XSN, so we need to change it to XTPs first before we can actually edit our template part. So here's our template part, and we're going to inject this workflow section into our expense report form. So just to show you that this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to change the background color. I'm just going to change the theming here. Well, you can't change the theme because template parts do not have themes, but I can just change the background color here of this cell to some strange color, just to show you that we're live. And I'm just going to save this out. Okay, so we've made changes. We've created an XML template part. This XML template part has a schema, a data source associated with it. It has data connections associated with it, and it has data logic in the form. So there are rules, for example. If I click on the approve button, I can go into my rules, and you can see all those rules there. Now I'm going to inject this section, this common section, into my expense report form. And the benefit here is that we can reuse this over and over again, and you can design these sections in the designer, just like you see here. So I've saved it out, and I'm going to close it, and I'm going to open up my expense report form. Now my expense report form, just using the stock 2007 one because we like it, works fine in 2010 and 2013. And here's my expense report form. And for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to add my workflow section on top here. And now the workflow section is an XML template part. That means it's a custom control. That means I need to go to my control section here. I need to add it as a custom control. And you'll notice I already have it in the list, so I need to remove it first so I can add it again. Don't complain if I don't do that. There we go, 209, that's the one I want. Now once I've added it to my controls, you'll see it appear here at the very bottom of the list, and I can add it to my form. And voila, now I have a form that has that XML template part in it with the color update I made. And this is going to make my life a lot easier because this XML template part is going to allow me to connect to my task list and do a bunch of other things like approve and reject the form based on those button clicks. So let's look at a form that's been configured. Now there are a few more steps that you need to do to go through and configure it, and we have that in the documentation. So it's relatively straightforward. Now I have a SharePoint site out here, and here's my SharePoint site. So I've deployed this form to the SharePoint site, and the form is a content type. So when we go to library settings, you'll see in advanced settings that I have a content type selected. How do you design a form that's a content type? Well, you have to go back to form library settings and drill down on the content type. And then from here, we can actually open up the template. Okay, so here's InfoPath form template with the XML template part injected into it. We get two different views here. Here's the full view, and you can see here that we've got that XML template part injected into the form. Okay, now it doesn't have the orange background because I did this earlier, but if we updated it, we would see that. So this is the form. Now we can take a look at these buttons here and see what they do. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because we have a limited amount of time, but you can see that what I've done here is I've added a bunch of rules. So first of all, there's some formatting rules. And you see these at the top of the rules display here on the right. So we're hiding the section if, of course, the form has not been submitted. We don't want to show the workflow section or the button for that matter if the form has not been submitted. Let's take a look at what this let's demo what this looks like when you actually run it. Okay, so we're back in my library here, and I'm just going to create a new expense report form. And this is all browser configurable, so this is going to open up in the browser, and I'll add a business purpose for the Microsoft World Partner Conference, and that's in Houston, I believe, this year. And I'm going to set my manager's name equal to myself so that I get the notification. And we'll add the obligatory airline. And we'll add a hotel fee as well for the conference. Okay, so there's our two expenses. We're going to submit the form. Now when I submit this form, because it comes with that XML template part, that XML template part is helping us to map the data in the form to a task list. So we have our task lists here, and I believe this is the right one. If I refresh this, you'll see at the bottom we have now a new task for that expense I just created. So it's submitted. And this integration with the task list allows you to do other types of things. Like you can actually set up emails for the task list. You can use it in different kinds of workflows. If you have an in-text workflow, you can use a task list. So it's just a really nice thing to be able to integrate with the task list. And back now in the form, I also have the ability now to go ahead and approve it. So if I click on it again, we'll see that, oops, that's the wrong one. This one I just approved earlier. Okay, so here's the one that I want to show you how to approve, and actually this one has been approved, so this is not the one I want. I'm in the wrong location here. Let's just verify. I got the one on top that was 818. That's the one I want. So they're out of order. Okay, so here's the one that I just submitted, and you can see here that the XML template part is giving us this section that has the task in it. So we're selecting the task. We're saying, oh, looks good. And we're going to click the Approve button. Okay, now it's approved, and I could have closed the form, and I could have done other things, but just very simple integration for now. So we've approved the form, and because it's in the task list, we can go back to that task list and can see that there's a new task here, and it's showing that the form has been approved. So once again, the integration with the workflow section allows us to quickly, first of all, reuse workflow logic in the form. It's easy to add to the form. You're just dragging and dropping it from the custom controls. You can use it. It's easy for users because it shows the decision next to the data, and you can, of course, customize it however you want. So it's much easier to look integrated than, it's much easier to make integrated or make it look better than if you had a SharePoint box workflow. And we'll see metrics in a second. So what I just did was I created an XML template part, or I showed you one that was already created. We added it to a form. And then you would configure data connections, you'd promote the properties, and you'd configure buttons to do the rules. Now let's just take a look at the form again here in the designer. I want to show you where the promoted properties are. If you go into the File, Form or Properties, or I guess this is Information tab, you can see here underneath Promoted Properties we have current status promoted. And that's going to be useful for the next demo I show you, where I show you SharePoint integration. So let's take a look at that. So SharePoint Designer workflows, and I've got the SharePoint Designer here, I'll show in a second, but these are your out-of-box default workflows for SharePoint, and they work on all document types, not just InfoPath. You're going to be creating reusable workflows for your InfoPath forms, and that'll give you a workflow dashboard. And let's just take a look at it right now. The SharePoint Designer can be installed. It's free. You just download it from Microsoft's site, and this is the 2010 version. Now here I've already gone in and selected the workflow that I created for that library. So I have my, this is our Part 9 Lab 1 from the training. I've created a form in there, the expense report form, which is actually is tied to a content type. So the workflow has to work on that content type. And you can see here, very simple workflow. I just have 2 different steps. I'm using that current status, and I can look up every single promoted value when I create my workflow steps, because it integrates SharePoint Designer-based workflows integrate with the columns in SharePoint, and if you promote the properties from InfoPath, you will get that data. So that's what we've done here. We've said if the current status is not empty, you want to create an item in our new metrics list. So let's take a look at that. So here is my metrics list, and you can see that I haven't updated this list. If I refresh it now, you'll see that I have 2 new items here for when I submitted that workflow and when I approved it. And I'm creating these items in this separate list using a workflow. So the form is also creating tasks, but that's in the form logic. Here what we're seeing is the workflow creating list items using this workflow step. Very simple, right? We just have a step here, and we can edit this, but you can see that to add a step, you just go in here and you click step, and then of course, I'm sorry, I didn't really want to do that. But to add an action, so we have a step 1. Inside the step 1 we have a condition, and inside that condition we have that action. If I want to add an action, I just go up here to the ribbon and I click, and I've got all these different actions. I can create a list item and so on. So I had just, before I just selected this this item down here, where is it? Create list item right there. And I want to create a list item in my workflow metrics list. And I want to output the information that I've created. Now the next step I have is I have an email. So if the assigned to person is not empty, and this once again is from the form, just selecting the promote property from the form, I'm actually going to send email. So let's take a look at my Outlook and let's see if that happened. And lo and behold, I do have an email. Now, before I show you this, let's take a look at this email step here. This action gives us the ability to create a rich email. You can insert items from the form into it. So here we have the subject line actually has this current assigned to person in there. The assigned to person is going to be the person getting the email. And this is all from the form content. So the form is promoting the assigned to email value. And the workflow, the SharePoint workflow, is using that promoted property to create a custom email message. Very useful. So here's the email message I got. And this is just, you can see moments ago. So very simple. Now you would want to include a link to your form so you can open it from here. But this is a simple example of how to do that. And you can also set permissions. You can change the permissions of your workflow. And the way you do that is there's a different location to click on impersonation step here. So it's a little bit different than the other ones. And then you would add it so you can remove the permissions. That's useful sometimes when you want to have people submit forms, but you don't want to allow them to change them after they've submitted them. So here's kind of what I showed. Let's go through this again here. So in InfoPath, I created an XML template part on the right. I injected that into my form. I published my form to the SharePoint form library, my expense report. That form has logic to read and write from the task list. Okay, and it also has its content type, so it has a workflow associated with it. That workflow then sees that there's a new item in the list, in the library, and then it does two things. It sends an email notification to the user, and it also creates a metric. Now let's take a look at those metrics. So now that we have the metrics, we can actually create a nice little view to show the metrics. Now here, this one's associated with the previous library. You can see we did some testing this morning. I don't have one associated with my test library, but you can see that I've created an InfoPath form here that quickly just shows me some metrics. And these are all orange because we set it up to be, I think, 2, 4, and 8 minutes. So green would be, I guess, less than 8. Orange would be less than, I don't know how it works, but I think orange is less than 2. So these have all been expired, right? They've all been happened in the past. But the idea here is you can create a simple InfoPath form that allows you to see that metrics on how the workflow is working. And this can all be done with InfoPath, and we have this lab as well. So we have 3 labs for you today. We're going to have a lab to show you how to create the workflow using the XML template part. We have a lab that shows you how to create the workflow using SharePoint Designer, and we have another lab that's going to show you how to create the metrics from the separate list. Okay, that's the Whirlwind demo. Any questions for me? I can certainly go back to the demo and highlight something if I went too fast. So we do have some questions, and Michelle is asking for SharePoint workflows that are status driven. Should the status field be created directly in the library instead of the form? So great question, and you don't want to use custom columns for those statuses. You do want to use them from the form. You want to promote the value from the form, and that allows you to create logic in your form that will set the status easily. You can't set the custom columns in your SharePoint library as easily from the InfoPath form as you can if it's in the form. Now when you promote the property in your form, it automatically becomes a custom column, not a custom column, but a regular column in your view. So that's a great question, Michelle. You also had a second question onto that. You notice the SharePoint workflows don't pull the drop-down selections if the field is created within the form. They do actually. They will. The SharePoint workflows will. Well, actually, maybe what you're asking is the values for the drop-down. Correct. They would not pull the values for the drop-down, but it's easy enough to use a list. In other words, have the drop-down connected to a SharePoint list and then have that value compared to it in the workflow. So you can do what you want to do. Just make sure that both the drop-down in the form that's tied to status is tied to a list. That list has whatever approved, rejected, submitted, whatever the status is. And then your workflow condition would also have the same list lookup, and it would compare the value of the status promoter property to that list. So that's how you would do that. Tom's got a question. When changing from library published form to content type, is workflow associated with the library or separate content type? Yeah, so if you're going from a form library to a content type, then of course you're going to have to associate that workflow to the content type. So you will have to change the workflow to reassociate it, but you should be able to do that. Byron, you mentioned that workflows can move documents to a different document library. Is that covered in your lab? Well, it's very simple. I mean, it's just so simple it's almost not worth. I mean, we have here, we're creating a list item. To move it to a separate library, you just you go in here, create a step. You put a condition on this. Typically, you'd want to compare the status to make sure that it was approved, right? So we'd want to add the condition. Let's see here. This is just the standard condition. So we're going to select the current status, once again, from the form. And the value for this would be, I guess, approved. And here's, Michelle, here's where you would type in the, you would look up into the list here. But for now, I'm just going to type it in. And then you would add an action, and this action would be to move it. And so down below here, you can see that we have these items here to move them. Where is it here? There is an item to copy a list item. So that's what you want, I believe. Now, let me just make sure, because it says list. Sometimes I get confused, but make sure there's another. Yeah, so the core actions then, yeah, it's just the list items. So because lists and libraries are the same in workflow land. So then you would just select that library from here. And let's see if I can find it. Right there. You select the library, and then you select the items from there, and then you would, did I do the right one here? And then you would, yeah, so there's a rule in here, an action in here, to move it from one place to another. And there are lots of places online that you can look into to also, there's lots of workflow labs that show the same technique. Very easy to do using the out-of-box reusable workflow actions. Justin, in your demos, are you using a few different versions of SharePoint, or are you just using one version at this point? And which one, if so? Well, we're currently on 2010 for our, well, we have all kinds of versions. We've got 2007, 2003, 2010, 2013. We have a virtual environment here, and I'm using 2010 for this demo because this is the most popular one right now. You can see, though, that I'm using InfoPath 2013 on my client. And InfoPath 2013 works just fine with 2010. You just have to make sure that your form is set up to be the right compatibility, and that's where this is right here. So if I had selected web browser for 2013, it would have an error publishing as a browser form for 2010. So just make sure that your compatibility is set correctly. King, your question, is the metrics you showed us a SharePoint list or a form displaying items from a list? Both. We have a list, and then we have a form on top of it that's in a web part page that is displaying the data. And that's the power here of these InfoPath forms in the browser. You can create an InfoPath form that's your dashboard, and it's quite easy to create these forms. I didn't go into detail and show you this form, but we can take a quick look at it here in the designer. So here's what the form looks like, right? The form is just pulling the data from the list. So I've got a data connection that pulls from that metrics list, right? There's my workflow metrics. I'm just pulling it in from that list and showing the data and then coloring it based on date time. You know, if it's old or whatnot, I will put a different color on it. Hopefully that answered your question. Tom's got one more question here. Does copy list item work for form libraries? Yes, it does. And Byron, you said thanks. Well, anyway, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. We love doing these weekly webinars, and we will send out the package. Just a few more things here to talk about. Just one or two more things. I think we're almost done here, but I just want to go back to the presentation for a second because if you don't fill out the survey, you can still get our webinar kit. We have a small $29 processing fee to send you the kit, and mainly it's for people who didn't attend. If you attended, you fill out the survey, you get this for free. We also provide this new subscription annually if you want to get all of our webinar kits every week. We will send you a list of content. You know, it's short, it's 30 minutes of your day or whatever, and you can subscribe to those webinar kit annually for just $200. So that's it for me. I want to say thank you again. Don't forget to send your feedback. Next week we will be talking about lists and drop-downs and how to make an InfoPath form that edits for list items. And we've got a really new technique for doing that. You've seen this in the past, but we've got actually a faster technique next week on this. So don't forget to sign up for next week's class. Okay, a couple more questions. One from Susan. What is the purpose of copying those items into a separate list? Right. So in the demo, you saw me creating items. And the purpose of that is so that we can do metrics. We want to create an item every time there's an action so that we can then report on the data. Out-of-box SharePoint workflows don't give you that reporting on the different actions. So if we want to compare, for example, how long something took to go from submitted to approved, we would need to create separate items in a list. So that's what I showed Susan in my demo, is creating those different items. People like to copy items from one list to another because one list has certain permissions that the other list doesn't have. So for example, you might have one library that's completely wide open. Everyone can submit there. Then you have a workflow in that library that copies those guys to a separate library, which is read-only. Only the approvers have access to that. So that's a very common use for the copied list item. Gus has got a question, can you display that in InfoPath dashboards in MOS 2007? Yes, you can. It is completely, MOS 2007 has browser support, so you can definitely do that. Tom, are you having a webinar on July 4th? Good point. Next week is July 4th, and for those people who are not in the U.S., we will be doing the webinar. Yes, crazy as that may seem, we do have quite a few people on the line from far off foreign locations, so we will be continuing the webinars next week at the same time. Thanks for asking the questions, and thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure always to present to you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.